Let me tell you about the day humanity accidentally became the most terrifying species in the known galaxy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't because of our technology, our weapons, or our stunning good looks. No, we won by being so monumentally stubborn that the entire Galactic Consortium essentially rage quit the war. The Nexian Consortium had been cruising through the galaxy for millennia, conquering civilizations like most people collect stamps. They were sophisticated, calculated, technologically advanced beyond human comprehension. And they made one fatal mistake: they completely underestimated us. First contact happened on a Tuesday. Because of course it did. Their massive diplomatic vessel appeared in Earth's orbit with all the subtlety of a cosmic billboard, broadcasting demands in what I can only describe as a language that sounded like a garbage disposal making sweet love to a wind chime. The universal translator took about 17 minutes to decode their message, which basically boiled down to surrender your planet. Resistance is mathematically improbable. Admiral Krellax of the Consortium's subjugation fleet was particularly proud of this ultimatum. He'd used it 372 times before, with a 99.7% success rate. Statistically speaking, humanity should have folded faster than a cheap lawn chair in a hurricane. But here's the thing about statistics: they don't account for human beings. Our initial response wasn't a passionate speech. It wasn't a strategic military transmission. No, the first official human communication was a somewhat confused diplomatic aide named Marcus Rodriguez saying, "Wait, you want what now?" followed by a solid minute of bewildered silence. The Consortium found this perplexing. Their initial invasion plan was elegant, precise, mathematically perfect. They would disable key infrastructure, neutralize communication networks, and demonstrate overwhelming force within 72 standard galactic hours. They had algorithmic projections, quantum probability models, and centuries of conquest data backing their strategy. What they didn't have was any understanding of human beings. Their first wave of attack targeted major cities. Massive energy weapons that could theoretically vaporize entire urban centers with a single pulse. Impressive technology, meticulously calibrated destruction. Except they didn't realize that humans, when faced with certain doom, don't typically respond with rational surrender. We respond with hold my beer energy. In New York, when the first massive energy weapon powered up, the city didn't evacuate in an orderly manner. Instead, a group of construction workers, 3 taxi drivers, and what witness reports described as an absolutely wasted wedding party, started throwing whatever they could find at the alien landing craft. Did it make tactical sense? Absolutely not. Did it confuse the living hell out of the Consortium's invasion algorithms? Absolutely. The reports from the first invasion units were increasingly bizarre. Alien commanders received transmissions describing humans using everything from fire extinguishers to office chairs as improvised weapons. One particularly memorable report detailed a subway conductor who, upon seeing an alien ground unit, simply drove his train directly at the invader while blasting Bruce Springsteen's Born to run at maximum volume. The Consortium's strategic AI literally needed a reboot after processing that particular incident. What they didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength has never been our technology or our individual capabilities. Our superpower is our absolutely batshit capacity for collective stubbornness. We are a species that will argue with a toaster, fight a raccoon for the last slice of pizza, and negotiate with a GPS that clearly has no idea where we're going. And now we were about to negotiate with an entire alien invasion force. Admiral Krellax would later describe those first hours of invasion as the most statistically improbable military engagement in recorded galactic history. What was supposed to be a quick, clean subjugation had devolved into complete chaos. Humans, it turned out, do not have a surrender setting. As the first waves of invasion commenced, the Consortium would slowly, painfully realize that they weren't just fighting a planet. They were fighting an entire species that collectively decided, nah, we're not doing that today. The war was just beginning, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what we're made of. Spoiler, it's equal parts caffeine, spite, and absolutely unhinged determination. The invasion begins. The first full-scale invasion hit Los Angeles at precisely 0347 hours, which I'm pretty sure was deliberate on the Consortium's part. Nothing says we're conquering your planet quite like interrupting everyone's REM sleep. Jack Reiner was not a military hero. He was a 34-year-old network systems engineer who had recently been written up for accidentally setting the office coffee machine on fire while trying to optimize its brewing algorithm. His idea of tactical planning typically involved rerouting network traffic and arguing with its support. The universe, with its delightful sense of irony, was about to make him humanity's unlikely first responder. When the first wave of dropships breached the atmosphere, Jack was doing what most people do at 3:47 a.m., arguing with strangers on an obscure online forum about the optimal cable management technique for server racks. His apartment, a modest one-bedroom with more computing equipment than furniture, suddenly lit up with external monitoring alerts that definitely did not look like normal network traffic. "That's not standard," Jack muttered, switching between security camera feeds and global network monitoring screens. The consortium's invasion strategy was a masterpiece of military precision. Massive gravitational displacement generators created controlled landing zones. Energy shields neutralized conventional weapons. Biomechanical infantry units designed to adapt to any terrain began systematic urban pacification protocols. What they didn't account for was Jack Reiner and his absolutely bonkers network of internet acquaintances. Within moments of the first confirmed alien landing, Jack had already created 3 separate chat groups, cross-referenced municipal infrastructure maps, and was coordinating a response that no military strategist could have predicted. The H support community, a group known for their caffeine-fueled problem-solving and complete disregard for conventional limitations, was about to wage war. "Guys," Jack typed in the main chat, "we're going to need to get creative." The alien ground units moved with terrifying efficiency. Biomechanical exoskeletons adapted instantly to terrain. Weapon systems could recalibrate faster than human reflexes. They had conquered hundreds of civilizations. This should have been routine. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that viewed rules of engagement as a mild suggestion. In downtown Los Angeles, a group of delivery drivers weaponized their trucks into mobile jamming stations. A local community college's engineering department transformed campus maintenance equipment into makeshift defense platforms. And somewhere in the San Fernando Valley, a group of gaming enthusiasts used their extensive knowledge of multiplayer strategy to create real-time tactical communication networks. The consortium's invasion AI began experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. Jack's primary contribution wasn't physical combat. It was infrastructure disruption. By manipulating network protocols, redirecting municipal power grids, and creating communication bottlenecks, he turned the city into a labyrinth that constantly shifted and changed. "We're not fighting," Jack explained to a bewildered emergency response coordinator. "We're debugging a system." The alien commanders watched in mounting confusion as humans responded to invasion with a level of improvisational chaos that defied all strategic modeling. When standard pacification protocols failed, the humans didn't panic. They got creative. In San Diego, a group of marine biologists repurposed underwater research equipment to create electromagnetic interference fields. In Seattle, a coffee roasting company used their industrial equipment to generate heat signatures that completely scrambled alien thermal imaging. And in Chicago, a group of improv comedy performers used their skills of rapid adaptation to create disinformation campaigns that left alien communication networks in total disarray. Jack's laptop became a war room. Multiple screens displayed network topographies, municipal infrastructure maps, and real-time communication channels. He wasn't just defending, he was treating the entire invasion like the world's most complex debugging session. "Okay," he muttered, fingers flying across multiple keyboards. "If this were a network, where are the potential vulnerability points?" The consortium had never encountered a resistance like this. Their invasion algorithms assumed logical, predictable responses. Humans provided anything but. When a landing unit's energy weapons failed to activate, a nearby teenager would throw a bicycle. When communication networks were disrupted, people would use ham radios, CB channels, and carrier pigeons if necessary. Adaptation wasn't just a human skill. It was a human art form. Admiral Krelax, watching from the invasion command ship, began to realize they were no longer conducting a military operation. They were engaged in a species-wide improvisation performance where the rules were constantly changing. By noon of the first invasion day, the consortium had accomplished less than 12% of their initial occupation objectives. Their perfectly calibrated invasion plan looked like a computer program written by someone having a stroke. Jack Reiner, who had started the day as a mid-level network engineer with a coffee machine vendetta, was now effectively coordinating a city-wide resistance using nothing more than internet connections, caffeine, and an absolutely refusing to quit attitude. "We're not losing," Jack told his increasingly shell-shocked team of online collaborators. "We're just running an extended system diagnostic." The invasion continued. But for the first time in galactic history, the invaders were starting to look nervous. Unconventional warfare. If the first day of invasion was chaos, the following weeks were what happened when chaos decided to get really creative. The consortium's military leadership held emergency strategy sessions that increasingly resembled group therapy for traumatized strategists. Their perfectly modeled invasion protocols were being systematically dismantled not by military might, but by what could only be described as human chaos theory in real time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez wasn't a soldier. She was a behavioral psychologist who had spent her entire career studying human adaptation and group dynamics. When the invasion began, she became something far more dangerous: a psychological warfare architect who understood exactly how humans break and, more importantly, how they never, ever give up. "They're treating this like a linear problem," Elena explained to Jack during one of their encrypted communications. "But humans aren't linear. We're more like quantum uncertainty with caffeine. The key to human resistance wasn't technology. It was unpredictability. Take the incident in rural Nebraska, where a farming collective discovered that the aliens' advanced sensor systems could be completely disrupted by introducing massive amounts of electromagnetic interference. Their solution? Massive Tesla coils constructed from agricultural equipment and enough copper wire to circle the planet. When alien reconnaissance units attempted to scan the area, they received data that suggested the entire region was simultaneously a wheat field, a quantum computing center, and possibly a live music festival. The confusion was so complete that 3 separate invasion units required complete system resets. In Montreal, a group of performance artists and network engineers created what they called cultural jamming units. These weren't military weapons. They were walking, talking disinformation machines that could generate such complex, nonsensical communication patterns that alien translation algorithms would crash. Miko Tanaka, a 28-year-old game designer, became an unexpected hero of psychological warfare. Her background in designing complex multiplayer game scenarios translated perfectly into resistance strategy. She developed what she called narrative disruption protocols, essentially methods of communication so bizarre that they would cause the consortium's communication networks to waste significant processing power trying to decode them. "It's not about making sense," Miko explained during an encrypted transmission. "It's about making them waste resources trying to make sense of us." The consortium's military leadership, led by the increasingly frustrated Admiral Krelax, found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Their invasion models, developed over thousands of years of galactic conquest, were failing spectacularly. "They're not fighting," Admiral Krelax told his senior commanders during an increasingly heated strategy session. "They're trolling us." The word trolling had no direct translation in the consortium's language. It would take their linguistic databases several weeks to even begin comprehending the concept. Jack Reiner's network of resistance fighters wasn't a traditional military structure. It was more like a massively multiplayer problem-solving exercise where the prize was planetary survival. Engineers, artists, gamers, farmers, comedians, everyone was a potential weapon. When alien units attempted to disable power grids, they discovered that humans had developed backup systems that made no logical sense. Solar panels jury-rigged to bicycle generators, hydroelectric systems connected to municipal water fountains, wind turbines constructed from recycled materials that looked more like modern art installations than power generation units. Dr. Elena Rodriguez documented these adaptations with a mix of scientific fascination and barely contained humor. "We're not just resisting," she noted in her research logs. "We're performing an improvisational dance with an alien invasion force, and we're leading." The psychological warfare became increasingly sophisticated. Humans didn't just resist. They confused. They confused. They misdirected. They turned the entire invasion into a massive, planet-wide game of global gaslighting. Radio broadcasts would suddenly switch to cooking shows in the middle of emergency transmissions. Alien communication channels would be flooded with cat videos, conspiracy theory podcasts, and amateur stand-up comedy recordings. Navigation systems would be deliberately scrambled to show impossible geographical configurations. Miko Tanaka's crowning achievement was a communication protocol that, when decoded, would present alien communication units with what appeared to be an endless, recursive loop of bureaucratic paperwork. Entire invasion units would become trapped, trying to process permission forms that reference themselves in increasingly complex ways. "It's like a cognitive DDoS attack," Jack said, equal parts impressed and terrified by the complexity of human resistance. The consortium's military leadership began to experience what could only be described as an existential breakdown. Their perfectly calibrated invasion models were being dismantled not by superior firepower, but by a species that seemed to view linear logic as a mild suggestion. Admiral Krelax would later describe this period as the most statistically improbable military engagement in galactic history. Humanity wasn't just fighting. We were performing an intricate, planet-wide improvisation where the only rule was there are no rules. And we were damn good at it. Turning the tide. There's a moment in every conflict when the impossible becomes probable. For humanity, that moment arrived not with a grand military maneuver, but with a series of increasingly ridiculous breakthrough moments that left the consortium's military leadership questioning their entire understanding of strategic warfare. The turning point began in an unlikely place, the International Space Station, which had been quietly observing the invasion from orbit. When communication networks were compromised, the station's multinational crew decided to do what humans do best: solve an impossible problem with duct tape, caffeine, and sheer audacity. Commander Sarah Lockhart, a Canadian astronaut with a background in both aerospace engineering and improvisational theater, realized that the station's existing scientific equipment could be weaponized in ways no alien invasion algorithm could predict. "We're going to turn a multi-billion-dollar research platform into the galaxy's most sophisticated practical joke," she told her crew. Nobody argued. Using the station's robotic arms, they began launching precisely calculated packages into the consortium's invasion fleet. These weren't traditional weapons. They were carefully constructed payload packages designed to create maximum confusion. The first package contained nothing but thousands of rubber ducks, each embedded with a tiny GPS transponder and a low-frequency radio transmitter. When the alien ship's sensors attempted to analyze the objects, they received conflicting data that suggested these were simultaneously navigation beacons, potential biological hazards, and possibly sentient life forms. 3 separate consortium battle groups spent weeks trying to develop containment protocols for weaponized rubber ducks. On Earth, Jack Reiner and his network of resistance collaborators were transforming every possible system into a potential resistance tool. Municipal infrastructure became a massive planet-wide neural network that could shift and adapt faster than any invasion algorithm could predict. Miko Tanaka's psychological warfare strategies reached new heights of complexity. She developed communication protocols that would cause alien translation systems to generate recursive logic loops, essentially creating digital quicksand that would trap entire communication networks. Dr. Elena Rodriguez documented these strategies with a blend of scientific rigor and barely contained amusement. "We're not just resisting," she noted. "We're performing an elaborate species-wide improvisation where the only rule is continuous adaptation." The consortium's military leadership, led by the increasingly frustrated Admiral Krelax, found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Their invasion models, developed over thousands of years of galactic conquest, were being systematically dismantled by a species that seemed to view linear logic as a mild suggestion. Breakthrough moments happened simultaneously across the planet. In Buenos Aires, a group of industrial designers discovered that the aliens' advanced sensor systems could be completely disrupted by creating massive electromagnetic interference patterns using modified welding equipment. In Tokyo, a collective of game developers created autonomous drone swarms that moved with such complex, unpredictable patterns that alien targeting systems couldn't establish a consistent tracking algorithm. The Australian outback became an unexpected front of resistance. Remote communities, already accustomed to surviving in harsh environments, transformed their landscape into a massive, living defensive network. Solar panels disguised as rock formations. Communication relays hidden in seemingly abandoned mining equipment. Entire towns became mobile defensive units that could relocate faster than invasion algorithms could predict. Admiral Krelax's frustration reached a boiling point during a critical strategy session. The holographic displays showed invasion progress that made no logical sense. Entire invasion sectors would report complete system failure, only to show inexplicable resistance moments later. "They're not following any known strategic protocol," one of his senior commanders reported. "It's like they're actively refusing to be conquered on principle." Krelax could only respond with a universal gesture that translated roughly to what the actual hell. The International Space Station continued its campaign of calculated chaos. Commander Lockhart and her crew launched increasingly sophisticated payload packages. Some contained complex data packages designed to overwhelm alien communication networks. Others were pure psychological warfare packages that would generate holographic displays of completely nonsensical scenarios when scanned. Imagine an alien battle network receiving a data package that simultaneously suggests an invasion is happening, is not happening, and might be happening in an alternate dimension where everyone is wearing funny hats. That was the level of confusion humanity was generating. Jack Reiner's resistance network had transformed from a loosely connected group of technology experts to a global, adaptive organism. They weren't just fighting. They were debugging the largest, most complex system imaginable, planetary defense. "We're not losing," Jack would often tell his collaborators. "We're just running the most extended system diagnostic in human history." The consortium's invasion was no longer a military operation. It had become a species-wide performance art piece where the only rule was continuous, unrelenting adaptation. Humanity wasn't just resisting. We were thoroughly, comprehensively, and with maximum sass, refusing to be conquered. And we were getting really, really good at it. The final confrontation. The final battle wasn't fought with advanced weapons or strategic maneuvers. It was fought with the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever developed, our absolutely unhinged capacity to refuse defeat. Admiral Krelax's flagship hung in Earth's orbit like a massive metallic tombstone, its systems increasingly confused by humanity's relentless resistance. What had started as a routine planetary subjugation had devolved into the most complex military engagement in galactic history. Jack Reiner stood in a makeshift command center, which was really just a converted coffee shop basement in downtown Chicago, surrounded by screens, networking equipment, and an increasingly elaborate wall of post-it notes that looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream journal. "We're not going to win by fighting," Jack told the assembled team of resistance fighters. "We're going to win by being so monumentally difficult that they literally give up." Dr. Elena Rodriguez nodded, her behavioral psychology background crystallizing into a singular strategy, psychological warfare taken to its absolute extreme. Miko Tanaka had already prepared communication disruption protocols that would make even the most advanced alien communication systems curl up and whimper. The consortium's final assault was supposed to be their ultimate demonstration of technological superiority: massive gravitational displacement generators, quantum-locked weaponry, communication networks that could theoretically process information faster than thought. They didn't account for human stubbornness. As the invasion fleet prepared its final push, humanity responded with a level of collective resistance that defied all known military strategies. It wasn't just about fighting back. It was about making the very concept of conquest so monumentally exhausting that surrender would be a mercy. In orbit, Commander Sarah Lockhart and the International Space Station crew executed their most complex operation yet. Using a combination of scientific equipment, repurposed communication arrays, and what could only be described as weaponized passive aggression, they began broadcasting a continuous stream of data that was simultaneously meaningless and deeply frustrating. Imagine receiving a communication that is technically correct, completely incomprehensible, and subtly insulting all at the same time. That was humanity's final communication strategy. The alien fleet's communication networks started to experience what could only be described as a cognitive breakdown. Translation algorithms crashed. Strategic planning systems became trapped in recursive logic loops. Their most advanced artificial intelligence began generating response patterns that looked suspiciously like existential despair. On the ground, resistance was no longer about traditional military defense. It was performance art. It was psychological warfare. It was an entire species collectively deciding not today, alien overlords. Jack's network of resistance fighters had transformed every possible system into a weapon of mass confusion. Municipal infrastructure became a living, breathing defensive network. Power grids that could reconfigure themselves faster than invasion algorithms could predict. Communication systems that would generate data so complex that processing it became a form of torture. Admiral Krelax watched in mounting horror as humanity transformed an invasion into the most elaborate, planet-wide game of cosmic chicken anyone had ever witnessed. "They're not fighting," one of his senior commanders reported. "They're trolling us." The word trolling still had no direct translation in the consortium's language, but they were beginning to understand its essence. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was an intervention. Miko Tanaka's communication disruption protocols reached their ultimate expression. Entire alien communication networks were flooded with data streams There were simultaneously bureaucratic paperwork, cat videos, conspiracy theory podcasts, and what appeared to be an endless loop of municipal zoning regulations. Imagine being an advanced alien intelligence and suddenly finding yourself trapped in a communication network that feels like being stuck in line at the DMV while someone plays smooth jazz and reads municipal parking ordinances. That was humanity's ultimate weapon. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had predicted this moment. "We're not going to defeat them," she had told Jack months earlier. "We're going to make them so fundamentally exhausted by our existence that conquest becomes mathematically improbable." As the alien fleet systems began to crash, as their communication networks dissolved into pure cognitive chaos, Admiral Krelax made the only decision possible. They were surrendering. Not because humanity had superior technology, not because we had overwhelmed them with military might, but because we had made the very concept of conquering Earth so monumentally difficult that it was no longer worth the effort. Jack Reiner, network engineer turned accidental resistance leader, received the surrender transmission with a mix of disbelief and sardonic humor. "We're not losing," he told his team, echoing a phrase that had become their motto. "We're just completing the most extended system diagnostic in galactic history." Humanity hadn't just survived an invasion. We had turned it into an elaborate, planet-wide performance piece that would be studied by alien civilizations for generations. We hadn't defeated the consortium. We had thoroughly, comprehensively, and with maximum sass, refused to be conquered. Epilogue: the galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, that was entirely the point. 5 years after the invasion, the consortium's diplomatic records contained a new classification for humanity that roughly translated to approach with extreme caution and multiple layers of bureaucratic padding. It was the closest their language could come to expressing these beings are absolutely bonkers, and we are not dealing with that again. Jack Reiner, now officially recognized as the accidental architect of Earth's resistance, found himself in the most unexpected position. He was being invited to diplomatic conferences across multiple star systems not as a military strategist, but as something between a cautionary tale and a performance art instructor. "Humanity doesn't have a military doctrine," he would explain to bewildered alien diplomats. "We have an improvisation strategy that looks like chaos theory had a baby with caffeine addiction." Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research on human psychological adaptation became required reading in every major galactic military academy. Her groundbreaking work, Chaos as a Strategic Framework: How Humans Weaponize Unpredictability, was simultaneously respected, feared, and slightly misunderstood by every non-human civilization. The consortium's invasion records were sealed not out of embarrassment, but out of a genuine inability to explain what had actually happened. Their most advanced artificial intelligences were still attempting to process the communication logs from the invasion, generating reports that looked suspiciously like avant-garde poetry. Miko Tanaka became an unexpected diplomatic liaison, her background in game design making her perfectly suited to navigate the complex communication protocols of interstellar negotiations. She approached every diplomatic meeting like a multiplayer strategy game where the only rule was continuous adaptation. Humanity's reputation wasn't just restored, it was transformed. Other galactic civilizations began to view Earth not as a potential conquest target, but as a planetary-scale performance art piece that could potentially destabilize entire invasion strategies through sheer, unrelenting weirdness. Admiral Krelax, now retired, would occasionally be heard mumbling about rubber ducks and municipal zoning regulations in what passed for therapy sessions among the consortium's military leadership. The International Space Station was retrofitted into humanity's first serious deep space research and diplomatic platform. Commander Sarah Lockhart's team became living proof that the line between scientific research and elaborate practical joke was significantly more blurry than anyone had previously believed. Interstellar communication channels now included specific protocols for handling human communication, which was essentially a diplomatic way of saying expect absolutely anything. Earth's defense budget was now primarily allocated to departments with names like strategic improvisation and adaptive response technologies. Traditional military strategists were replaced by teams of network engineers, behavioral psychologists, game designers, and what could only be described as professional troublemakers. The universe had learned a critical lesson: humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered. We were a force of nature that happened to occasionally look like a species. Jack Reiner would often joke that humanity's true superpower wasn't technology or military might. It was our absolute, unrelenting refusal to follow any script except the one we were writing in real time. We're not a civilization, he would say, raising a coffee mug in some interstellar diplomatic gathering. We're an ongoing, planet-wide improvisation performance. And we're just getting started, the galaxy watched. And somewhere, Admiral Krelax involuntarily shuddered.